Call of Duty Zombies and controversy seem to go hand in hand, as nearly every entry into the franchise comes with some level of dissent from the fanbase. However, even with these occasional speed bumps inside of the mode, it really does seem like some Zombies maps take more heat than others, which is precisely what happened with DLC 2's The Tomb. Not even 3 months after launch, Treyarch released their 4th map inside of Black Ops 6, setting a new precedent and cadence in which maps are released. And while new content drops are always exciting, the pressure for Treyarch to deliver on their promise of exquisite round-based Zombies maps through BO6's lifecycle was weighing heavy on the developers, especially at this breakneck pace. As a result, The Tomb has now become one of the most contentious pieces of content that fans have received in quite some time, which obviously begs the question, why? Well, the answer isn't as straightforward as you may suspect. It's true that at first glance, the pushback The Tomb received appeared to be warranted, as it had been hampered by less than ideal circumstances set by Activision, whether it's voice actors being replaced, AI art being sold in the store, stability issues, or miscommunication. There just always seems to be something lurking in the shadows that ends up hurting the game in the short term, which is particularly common with Treyarch at the helm of development. And while DLC 2 partially suffered because of these behind-the-curtain complications, this doesn't mean that there are no redeeming qualities about The Tomb as a whole. In fact, there is quite a bit to love about the map, as it executes on many of Treyarch's gameplay innovations, showing that these new modern Zombies mechanics can thrive under the proper conditions. That being said, The Tomb grapples with some serious narrative issues, as the depth and veracity of the storyline is just absolutely piteous, as it further prolongs the primary story beats and stacks even more lunacy on top of an already crumbling tower of nonsense. The problem is that regardless of the good DLC 2 has to offer, fans have been getting pushed around and dealing with miscommunication from developers for far too long, and patience is clearly starting to wear thin. This is leading to segments of the community claiming that this time, Call of Duty Zombies is finally dead. And while the calamity surrounding The Tomb has been rather vivacious, as with anything, there is clearly more to the story waiting beneath the surface. Because despite Black Ops 6 Zombies finding its stride early on in its life cycle, for whatever reason, DLC 2 has Treyarch tripping over their own 2 feet, which is leading fans to take pause from all of this commotion and truly begin to wonder, what does the future hold for Black Ops 6 Zombies? Sometimes, in order to understand the direction someone or something is heading, it's useful to unearth the past in order to put together an idea of what may be coming down the line. And with all of this controversy surrounding The Tomb, well, let's just say that this isn't the first time that Zombies fans have danced to this tune. Transit, Die Rise, Zetsubo no Shima, Dead of the Night, Alpha Omega, there seems to always be a particular section of the Zombies game that undergoes severe scrutiny from fans in response to Treyarch's quote-unquote missing of the mark. And although in the present day these aforementioned maps are perceived favorably by many, that was not the case during the live release schedule for them, as during these periods the harsh outcry of Zombies is dead paired nicely alongside whichever map was in the community's crosshairs. However, in most of these games there was always a balance of fantastic content for fans to sink their teeth into, albeit some of it didn't release until later down the line. Mob of the Dead and Origins came much later in BO2's lifecycle, Zetsubo was surrounded by Shadows of Evil, DE, Gorod Krovi, and of course Revelations. Dead of the Night and Alpha Omega, while problematic at launch, have aged quite well and were slotted alongside some of the most beautiful and quest-heavy maps we have received to date. And so while it may be easy to judge The Tomb as a lackluster DLC map, we still don't have any idea of what is coming down the Black Ops 6 pipeline. But even with all of that context, there is still something different about the modern Zombies era that ratchets down the thrill of the next DLC map, making things feel less intoxicating. Because despite getting new content more rapidly than ever before, the systems which modern Zombies sit in are simply designed to achieve a different outcome than its previous counterparts. So what do I mean by that? Well, inside of Cold War, Vanguard, MWZ, and even Black Ops 6 Zombies to some extent, the game is built to have universal gameplay mechanics that span across the entire game, making every single Zombies experience feature complete. And while there isn't anything inherently wrong with this strategy, it does mean that in combination with Treyarch's accessibility goals, that the maps themselves are not intended to have as many unique gameplay features or obscure secrets, since developers want to funnel as many people as possible into playing their maps. A sentiment that is great for business and record-breaking financial growth, but hurts the overall identity and cohesion that makes COD Zombies remarkable. And so while maps like Firebase Z, the Archon, or a new Dark Aether Rift is in theory a new experience, it's more so a new playground to test out the breadth of gameplay systems that Treyarch has flushed out. And even though I prefer the former design language of COD Zombies, I would be lying if I said that there weren't many things in this new era that are are rather congenial. But what is peculiar is that prior to the launch of BO6, the way that Treyarch came across in their marketing material was that the franchise as a whole was all about returning to what made Black Ops so special. This was going to be done by bringing back fan-favorite gameplay mechanics and systems that were staples of an earlier era. This mission statement also included a heavy emphasis on round-based zombies, complete with subtle winks and nods towards the community that Treyarch was committed to listening more than ever before. This in some ways felt like an apology from the developers regarding all of the mishaps from the end of Black Ops 4, as well as for the overtly casual-friendly gameplay loop that persisted up through Modern Warfare Zombies. But now that we are a little over 3 months into BO6's life cycle and the dust has begun to settle, so to speak, we should, in theory, be able to assess things a little more accurately in terms of what we can expect from Treyarch with future Zombies experiences. That being said, this is only partly true, as the future feels more unclear than ever, as so far Treyarch has been attempting a variety of strategies with the Black Ops 6 Zombies gameplay and business models. Things like continuing to lean heavily into the universal gameplay systems instead of creating unique map features, which helps to perpetuate a lack of depth inside of the maps themselves in terms of both narrative and the quests, as well as creating overly simplified quests while the boss fights are largely difficult. But then there is another set of issues that are even causing more disarray, such as the interweaving of multiple narrative threads that are adding even more confusion and not bringing resolution in the storyline, the releasing of smaller maps in between and alongside these bigger Zombies experiences, making players question the size or number of maps that we should be expecting throughout the year, and then lastly, changing the DLC release schedule by increasing the pace of new content drops. And despite some of these aspects being steps in the right direction, when saying them all aloud, it feels like developers are immensely scattered and completely unsure of their end goal, which I do find to be a bit concerning. Ultimately, Call of Duty Zombies needs to be made for Call of Duty Zombies fans, as this broad appeal approach is the antithesis to not only the roots of the mode, but also with how BO6 began in late 2024, where Treyarch's focus was guided by innate precision. And while it's true that we've been in tight spots before as a community, there is a level of fatigue that sets in when another illusion becomes shattered by both marketing mishaps and poor communication, causing the tomb to be a linchpin in the hearts and minds of the Zombies player base. The origins of the tomb begin inside of the Citadel des Morts ending cutscene, where shortly after being attacked by the undead, Kraft alludes to our crew that we are to take the amulet collected from the Guardian to a dig site to acquire what we are actually looking for, the Sentinel artifact. This moment inside of Black Ops 6 Zombies was the beginning of the end for the Tomb's overarching success, as Treyarch took a calculated risk by referencing the Black Ops 2 fan-favorite map, Origins, as well as continuing to explore the Chaos storyline lore from Black Ops 4, but we'll be touching on that a bit later. Now, at face value, there is nothing wrong about paying homage to the roots of the franchise, or even reimagining content in order to repurpose it for a new and modern audience. However, this sets up the developers for extreme scrutiny, as everything they decide to do from this point forward would be under a microscope with the community looking down the eyepiece. Not only did the Tomb have incredible shoes to fill, it set a precedent for itself to live up to top-tier atmosphere, fantastic gameplay, and innovation, as we all know just how impactful Origins was on the mode as a whole. On top of that, there was another set of challenges to overcome, such as fulfilling the promise of the cliffhanger from Citadel des Morts and expanding upon a multitude of plot points from both Terminus and Liberty Falls, potentially bringing us more information on Richtof and Maxis and any updates regarding the Dark Ether. And in tandem with all of this exciting Zombies storyline information, Treyarch also teased this brand new map on 115 Day. This took the community by storm, as nothing like this has ever really happened before, as not only were we getting 4 maps within 3 months' time, but also as part of the launch of Season 2 and a belated 115 Day gift. To say that the community was ecstatic would have been an understatement. But as time went on, Treyarch became very cagey with the marketing, as they released a very short gameplay teaser showing glimpses of the map, the Wonder Weapon, as well as linking to the typical COD blog post laying out what we should expect within this brand new Zombies experience. And while at the time the blog post appeared to be apropos, looking back at it now, it looks more like the studio was keeping their cards close to their chest, as they knew that this map was not going to meet the expectations that fans had set in their mind regarding the corollary fan service implications from Citadel's ending cutscene. One section of the text stands out a bit, as the use of language allows for a different interpretation depending on what a particular player is looking for. We've crafted the tomb to provide an experience similar to Liberty Falls, featuring tighter play spaces with a focus on replayability. Just like in Liberty Falls, we're delivering plenty of side Easter eggs and even a reimagined wonder weapon inspired by our past. While Treyarch did state that the tighter play spaces were part of the agenda, the inference to Liberty Falls was slightly confusing. Did this mean that the size of the map is small like Liberty Falls, or dense with content? Was the main quest meant to be less complicated, or is that simply a reference to the ease of access that Liberty Falls poses to the casual player base? This choice in language is deliberate by the marketing team, and while there are no outright lies, this obfuscation is a bit demeaning to the audience, especially with the stakes being so high with the ties to Origins, the Chaos Story, Richtofen, and the Dark Ether. Narrative organization, communication, and marketing are so important when it comes to the reveal and exposition of a new content drop, which is all the more reason why, when the map turned out to have no intro cutscene, players felt slightly betrayed as these small transgressions began to pile on one another. And while an introductory cinematic is not by any means a requirement for a map, it seems a bit audacious when you remember just how important the tomb's narrative implications were meant to be. This is why the mixed reception of DLC 2 does make sense logically, and is really so frustrating because none of this really had to happen in the way that it did. But even though the way this map was teed up guaranteed the tomb would fall flat on its face, there is still an undercurrent of the positive attributes that should genuinely be praised, as things like atmosphere, core gameplay, and many parts of the main quest are done rather well. If you've been following this channel for a little bit now, you know how frequently we discuss atmosphere, art direction, and world building, along with just how important those elements truly are to crafting an immersive zombies experience. And while of course gameplay is very important to get right, if the player isn't enjoying the space that they are in, and the developers don't utilize that world to create interesting gameplay features, then the core gameplay loop can only carry you so far. And so when players initially spawned into the tomb, it appeared to be a bit concerning, as the map does feel rather unassuming while our crew simply trudges along atop a very dry and sandy excavation site. There are certainly interesting bits and pieces of historical artifacts, carvings, and statues lying about, but the real magic begins after entering one of two beautiful doorways that take you down a path to experience areas of the map that are much more ominous. Players are first able to explore the Neolithic catacombs, ossuary, and tombs, as well as the Shrine of the Hierophants, which all have their own unique set of characteristics. These passages are quite fantastical and somber, as human remains protrude from the walls and ceilings, while light gleaming from the torches gently dances upon the statues of heroic ancient Greek warriors. This is not to be confused with the sunlight peeking through the raised ceilings, allowing for a wonderful use of shadow and illumination, reminding the player that deeper into the recesses we go, the further away from safety we will be. Each of these pathways will bring players to a somewhat central locale known as the Deep Excavation Site, which has such an interesting design language, as it doesn't look like something Treyarch would normally create. There are very high open caverns with stalactites clinging on for dear life, as some sort of clouds or fog appear to stretch out across the lower sections of the caves as far as the eye can see. The etchings on the stone pillars in the center of the dig site look familiar, as they are reminiscent of the Origin stone pillars inside of the Crazy Place. But all of this really leads us to the pinnacle location of the map known as the Dark Ether Nexus, which can be accessed by heading to the subterranean temple, placing the amulet from Citadel de Mor on a small pile of Dark Ether crystals, and opening up the doorway to nowhere. This will also reveal all other entry points so that players can fast travel all around the map with ease. The Dark Ether Nexus is truly an outstanding and fantastical location. It feels somewhat tropical due to all of the fresh alien-like foliage, yet still plays on the cavernous element, fitting inside of the excavation theme with the rock formations and strange magical ruins. The purple, blues, and orange hues streaking across the player's field of view are fascinating, as some areas are more lit up than others, drawing your eye to different and potentially important areas for the main quest. And while the tomb has an incredible looking skybox, something about the textures make it seem lower resolution, which is kind of a bummer. But there is still this intergalactic tone that permeates through the space, and for whatever reason makes me imagine that there is a crisp and chilly bite to the air that slowly eats away at the characters' psyches, making them wonder if what they are risking their lives for is truly worth it all. And lastly, as the player begins to walk around and explore the Nexus, a disheveled set of floating stones block the way from the Sentinel artifact that is waiting for us in the distance. And now Now it's up to the player to figure out how to open up this gateway so that we can secure the object before Richtofen even realizes that it's gone. Now, theoretically speaking, the atmosphere on this map is fantastic, and I think most people would agree that it is interesting, charismatic, and is the most risk that Treyarch has taken with their art direction in quite some time. However, the foundation of a lot of this world building that the developers are attempting to convey is very confusing and isn't grounded in any of the principal narrative beats or marketing promises which were made by Treyarch. And where these cracks begin to show themselves is during the main quest, when all of the atmospheric and narrative endeavors merge together to reveal that this may be a situation of one step forward and two steps back. But what makes this all the more interesting is that the Tomb's main quest is actually pretty solid from a gameplay standpoint and decently challenging. So while it's true that there is an incongruity with the portrayal of this Dark Ether information, the main quest as a whole has some aspects of old Treyarch peering out from behind the curtain, giving me a bit of hope for the future for Black Ops 6 Zombies Easter eggs. So let's first go over the actual main quest, and then we will dissect the narrative shortcomings to see how this all fits in the grand scheme of things. This Easter egg begins, as many do, by opening up the Pack-a-Punch and embarking on building out the wonder weapon, which in this case is the reimagined Ice Staff from Origins. However, there's a little twist with the amulet that we are holding, where it is able to transmit old memories from a new character named Sir Archibald Fotherington Smythe, a British archaeologist who went on an excavation at this very site in 1908 at the behest of Alistair Rhodes from the Chaos storyline. This means during the main quest, as we push through, players are able to hear what is happening during this excavation from the perspective of Archibald, which took place nearly a century ago.
Alright, chaps, no time for lollygagging. Tally-ho!
This is a concept that classic Treyarch maps did really well, which was the creation of a self-contained story inside of a zombies experience that also tied to the larger narrative as a whole. And while this hasn't been executed nearly as well in the more recent modern era of zombies, the Tomb really does its best to recreate that idea, and in some instances really sticks the landing. But then there are other moments that, well, they just don't really make sense. But we'll come back to that later in the video. Now that the Pack-a-Punch has been unlocked and we're able to begin crafting the wonder weapon, the first thing players need to do is locate a monocle that is dropped from killing a mimic, and also to shoot various etheric lanterns in front of areas of the map nearest to the dig site so that they will respawn in a specific location and activate a hidden puzzle. How this works is that the light from the etheric lantern shines through the monocle and reveals a constellation pattern where a code needs to be entered by shooting the Roman numerals in numerical order. Once the puzzle is solved, a lockdown sequence will begin that spawns in a variety of zombies, pests, and mini-bosses, and once the process is complete, a piece of the Ice Staff will reveal itself, and the player will be able to repeat this process again on the other side of the tomb to acquire the second part of the wonder weapon. This sequence is rather enjoyable and showcases that Treyarch still has the ability to make interesting quest steps if they so desire. Shooting the various etheric lanterns so the player can use a lens to reveal a secret code, that's fantastic, but the step falls back into the arms of accessibility by the reveal passively occurring and not having to actually use the monocle as an interactable tool. Not to mention the process of shooting a code in order from numbers 1 through 10 is merely childish and insulting to the player's intelligence. Also, the use of RNG inside of Easter egg steps has not reared its ugly head in quite some time, as the community started to show a real adverse reaction to it during the height of the Black Ops 4 era. However, RNG is not an inherently bad system as long as it's implemented in a fun or exciting way. For example, when filling up the soul chests in Origins and a robot randomly comes along and steps on the chests, making players have to restart that process, that can be a fun or exhilarating moment as you're trying everything in your power to fill up the chest before the robot steps on you. But an example of terrible RNG would be something like completing Revelation's Easter egg without having Immolation Liquidation Gobblegum to help pad out the process of needing to get every single tool for the quest out of the box. There is clearly a fine line, and Treyarch implementing it here in the tomb with these lanterns is a good step in the right direction, as it's clever and allows players to use the environment to their advantage, as the lanterns can also cause damage to the zombies, making them easier to kill. Anywho, I digress. Now that we have both pieces of the Ice Staff, the player can hoist it upon the center stage for another lockdown ritual where enemies are pouring in trying to destroy the mending wonder weapon. This process is surprisingly challenging, as the Ice Staff doesn't have that much health and the amount of enemies on screen is absolutely shocking. And if players don't hold off on this step and get a little bit more set up, well, they are bound to have a bad time.
You're gonna have a bad time.
But once the Ice Staff is put back together, we are able to use it and begin the upgrading process, which again requires us to use the beloved etheric lanterns, but this time we get to freeze them. This step again received mixed reception from the community, but I think Treyarch made the right call by formatting the puzzle this way. How it works is that the player needs to shoot 3 etheric lanterns with the ice staff to freeze them within a very short time window, meaning that this step is completely up to the player regarding how difficult they want it to be. To put it simply, if you shoot the right etheric lanterns, they will spawn closer together, and if you're patient enough, this whole step will be a complete breeze to complete. After this, players can head to the Dark Aether Nexus, where up above are 3 boulders with glowing rune symbols on them that need to be shot with the ice staff so that they can lower down to see the rune symbol more clearly. Once the player memorizes these 3 symbols, you'll notice that one of the 4 entry points to the Dark Aether Nexus has been locked and has rune symbols located on the other side of the door. And once we shoot the 3 symbols on the door that we memorize, we are able to hop inside the Dark Aether Nexus, where we will spawn atop a boulder in the sky with a mysterious dark ethereal energy orb waiting to be interacted with. From there, the boulder will tip us off, and the player will have to stay close to the orb while killing the undead until it eventually makes its way back to the ritual platform, where we can then upgrade the ice staff to its final form. This entire process is so damn awesome. Not only does this upgrade have really cool and interactable steps, but it uses the environment, the traps, and the weapons to encourage solving the puzzle. Not to mention, if you enter the wrong rune code when players spawn into the Dark Aether Nexus, they will actually miss the platform and take fall damage, which can potentially down them. And while the player escorts the orb around the map, a lot of chaotic things are happening, like tons of zombies spawning in, mimics, doppelgasts, amalgams, you name it, it's there. And this can make players lose track of the orb, causing them to fail the step if they're not careful. However, if you are patient and set up properly, as well as use the non-upgraded ice staff for defense, it really isn't as hard as it may look. But at the end of the day, having punishments or steps that can fail in quests is a good thing. This helps to encourage people to pay attention and optimize their playstyles so that the mission players are experiencing has weight or importance to it. And it's not that each of these steps are perfect, but it does show that classic Treyarch is in there, ready to implement interesting yet difficult systems to make main quests more challenging. But as long as they keep focusing on trying to make both steps hard and accessible, well, half measures we will continue to receive. That being said, now that the ice staff is fully upgraded, we are able to complete the remaining quest steps, which again, Treyarch did a really great job with. If you look up into the sky of the Dark Aether Nexus, you'll notice that there is something called the Monolith Crystal Shard, which needs to be activated so that our crew can unlock the pathway to reach the Sentinel artifact. And in order to do that, we will need to complete 4 challenges around the map by shooting certain statues with the back end of the ice staff, taking the essence energy to another corresponding statue, and surviving a particular challenge event. Each challenge has its own unique experience and enemies to take down, and while it isn't exactly a walk in the park, it's a nice palate cleanser after the difficulty that is building and upgrading the map's wonder weapon. After all 4 challenges are complete, we can return the ethereal energy back to the Dark Aether Nexus to power up the central platform, which shoots 4 beams into the Monolith Crystal Shard. This finally unlocks the gateway to the Sentinel artifact by turning the rock wall into a floating bridge for us to walk across and begin our final encounter. Now, up to the debut of DLC 2, the community has largely been in support of how Treyarch had been handling boss fights at the end of their main quests, but the tomb has received a lot of pushback from fans regarding its drastic increase in difficulty and rather abrasive gameplay mechanics. And while I think there are a few things that the player base are right about regarding this boss fight, I think they're right about them for the wrong reasons. But in order to break those reasons down, we need to understand how the boss fight works. After the Sentinel artifact is activated, it will begin to spin around in circles, slowly bobbing up and down while shooting out a deadly laser beam that both stuns and damages the players greatly. While this is occurring, the Sentinel artifact cannot be damaged until after it moves up and down 2 times, where it will then deconstruct its shield, giving the player the opportunity to shoot it with a bullet weapon until it knocks off a small chunk of health. This then pushes the Sentinel artifact into new phases where it splits itself up from 1 to 2 artifacts, then from 2 to 4, but the real challenge comes from when the artifact spawns into various HVT enemies with a similar set of abilities and another spectral copy of the artifact baked into it. So how these next phases work is the Sentinel artifact spawns in a regular zombie, and the player must kill the zombie, where then the Sentinel artifact will reveal itself for a small window of time where we need to shoot it and chip off another tiny bit of health. This is all happening while zombies are ferociously surrounding you in these tight quarters, making the experience quite intense and frustrating if you don't have a game plan in place. This cycle repeats, but each enemy that spawns in with a spectral copy of the artifact is more difficult than the previous, as it goes from a regular zombie to a doppelgast to a shock mimic and then to finally an amalgam. And these enemies are very, very tanky. Now on paper, the fight doesn't sound too hard, but it's really the claustrophobic layout of the boss arena as well as the HVT attacks that that cause problems, as they can essentially two-shot you if you're not careful. This means that players will need to use the ice staff for extremely meticulous crowd control, along with properly timed field upgrade usage, and even prolonging killing the HVTs so that you can kill more zombies to refill your armor, specialist meter, and gather other materials during the fight. But there is another kicker, and it's that even though you've defeated the enemies and moved up the ladder, so to speak, the previous enemies will still spawn in and are able to do the same stun attacks to you as before, meaning you're becoming more and more boxed in on top of everything else that's going on around you. And then finally, during the last phase, the Sentinel artifact splits into multiple forms of itself and flies up to the top of another gateway, preparing for one last attack. And if the player can't kill the artifact in time, this final wipe attack will one-shot the player, ending the entire match. Now, personally, I love this boss fight, mechanically speaking, and haven't had this much fun in quite some time, nor have I been challenged in zombies like this since the days of Black Ops 4. But at face value, it is completely justifiable as to why players were feeling frustrated and even think that the boss battle is unfair overall. The idea of playing a perfect match and not being able to take hits is a bit of an out there concept for a game that alludes to caring about the casual player. But the ironic part here, and something that most players are overlooking, is that this boss fight is completely scalable, meaning that the lower the round you can get into the action, the easier it will be to take out boss zombies, which in turn lowers the amount of enemy spam. The simple fact is, the longer it takes you to get set up and through the main quest means the more challenging the boss fight is going to be. And while some of these pain points can be alleviated by the side quest rewards, overall this dichotomy in choice is a brilliant move by Treyarch, as it puts the player in a conundrum of wanting to either have a tough time crafting the ice staff, as they will be underpowered in the early stage of the game, or they can head to the boss fight fully kitted up, but will have tankier enemies that are just shy of being a bullet sponge. To put it simply, the tomb is short, sweet, and to the point. It brings great challenge and utilizes interesting mechanics, giving the player different routes or strategies to take to really customize this bite-sized Easter egg in ways that are quite gratifying. It continues the trend of providing resistance when needed, but rewards players greatly for their trouble, providing a nice and gradual incline of friction and power that ultimately culminates towards an intense and unyielding boss battle. However, despite the gameplay aspects of this Easter egg being executed quite well for the most part, that doesn't mean that the steps themselves make any sense, as the real issue that many seem to have with this map is, again, the foundation on which it all rests, as there are so many little bits and pieces that are rather absurd when it comes to the why behind anything that we are doing here. One of the pillars of Call of Duty Zombies has always been making sure that the core storyline of the map and the greater storyline of the game was woven into the gameplay mechanics in clever ways that really showed just how detail-oriented the developers were when it came to their world-building prowess. While Blood of the Dead is one of the most polarizing maps inside of the community, I think most Zombies fans can agree that the level of detail inside of the map pertaining to both the narrative and gameplay experience is some of the best work Treyarch has done in their careers. Some great examples of this are the Golden Spork and how it's a play on prisoners using various objects to shank people inside of prisons, the shield and how it's a gateway to view the souls of the prisoners and hidden things around the map, which only activates when using the warden's key inside of it, which is a metaphor for him being in charge of the prison. The Magma Gatwin Pack-a-Punched is called the Magmus Operandi, a pun based on modus operandi, which is a Latin term to describe criminal behavioral patterns. And then last but not least, all of the Native American imagery and detail on both the Blundergat and Hell's Retriever, which pays homage to the history and dispute of that land between Native Americans and the United States government. These subtleties are the real reasons that Zombies maps are special, and so when Treyarch and Activision are simply stacking random bits from COD Zombies history in the name of fan service, that is the exact opposite of what most players want. Another aspect as to why some Zombies maps thrive more than others is due to how the connective tissue between a self-contained story and gameplay mechanics come together to form a unique and surreal experience, which is something that makes this mode so much more unique than a variety of AAA games on the market. And yes, the tomb does have a self-contained story, but unfortunately it's completely void of anything that resembles what the core identity of Zombies rests upon. The premise of DLC 2 is surrounding a character named Sir Archibald Fotherington Smythe, who was convinced by Alistair Rhodes back in 1908 to pursue the Sentinel artifact through excavating this particular site. As we mentioned before, the main crew is able to experience what Sir Archibald went through, as the amulet is relaying his experience of finding the Sentinel artifact. And while this is actually a pretty clever premise, once you start to pick it apart, you slowly start to realize how brittle the subplot really is. For example, how did Archibald and his crew make it into the Dark Ether Nexus without the amulet? How did Archibald know about the ice staff and how to upgrade it? What does shooting and freezing the etheric lanterns have anything to do with revealing constellations and boulders in space with runes on them? And how did these people survive this excruciating trial when our crew could barely make it out alive? The only well-written piece of exposition in this subplot is right before the boss fight when you hear this.
All these weeks searching, the sentinel artifact in the flesh, so to speak. Mine for the I say, is that a decanter? Oh, that damned Hots must have squirreled it away. Rumco got everything he deserved, what? Still, spot of port might be just the...
Now, the reason this is interesting is because the mimic that killed Archibald accidentally consumed the monocle that Alistair Rhodes gave to him. So when players kill that first shock mimic and it drops the eyepiece, that is actually where it came from. But this is essentially where the positives stop, because while it's great that Treyarch took a stab at making the Tomb's narrative a little bit more substantive, they completely forgot to push the character arcs forward with our main crew. All of these moving parts that we have come to expect inside of a zombies map are supposed to be happening simultaneously. Great subplot, great main plot, interesting character dialogue, amazing Easter eggs, and fun gameplay, all baked inside of a badass location that keeps players on the edge of their seats. But the buck doesn't stop there, as there are even more issues with the entirety of the chaos influence in Black Ops 6, making fans wonder why Treyarch is going against their own canon from half a decade prior.
Raptor 1, I'm at the LZ. Let's get the hell out of here.
There is more to be done now that you've secured the Sentinel artifact. Bring it directly to me. I have gathered every available file on the history and previous uses of this ancient device. It appears several times in the historical record. Some date back to ancient Egypt. I have deciphered steps to activate and control it. The artifact requires an infusion of exotic materials. Unique elements that can only be harvested here at Liberty Falls. I have already ensured everything we need is ready for your arrival. You will see your lost Agent Maxis again soon. I'll be waiting.
While it's great that our crew finally has the Sentinel artifact, this cutscene was just weird. It didn't feel like zombies at all, which I know is a tough thing to quantify, but it was merely an AI voiceover explaining to the players where we were going next with no dialogue from our crew whatsoever. But as we just mentioned a moment ago, this merging of the Chaos storyline into the Dark Ether is just odd, and like all of the other maps inside of BO6, this just leaves more questions than it does answers. Because as soon as you start to poke around just a little bit, you realize just how quickly everything begins to fall apart. Sir Archibald's excavation takes place in 1908 as he is going after the Sentinel artifact, and somehow that same artifact of Odin is on the Titanic in 1912. This would mean that the Sentinel artifact goes from the Dark Ether Nexus to the Titanic and back to the Dark Ether Nexus for our crew to pick up in the 1990s. There is also an alleged vast historical record showcasing that potentially Cortifex from Vanguard zombies used something called an instrument of renewal. This was implying that this could be the Sentinel artifact, but we're not sure. But if it is the Sentinel artifact, this simply negates the entire purpose of the Nine who created those in the first place to prevent the world from abusing prima materia for world domination. While I suppose there are a few bits of interesting information revealed, like how we're heading back to Liberty Falls to play at Richtofen's mansion, I have given up any and all hope that this storyline is redeemable, as this strange convergence of so many narratives is creating a Jenga tower effect where at any moment, if the wrong brick is moved, the entire structure will collapse. As the Dark Ether, Chaos story, Vanguard, and even the initial Ether timeline all begin to bleed together, confusion, doubt, and lack of confidence is being sown regarding the direction our crew is headed. This becomes especially true when the previous map and marketing communication heeded an entirely different set of expectations. One of the more troublesome issues inside of the modern zombies landscape is surrounding the use of homogenized gameplay systems. This is referring to, of course, the use of loadouts, crafting tables, ammo crates, no perk limit, etc, etc. And just because these things are in the game doesn't mean that maps have to feel the same, as Treyarch can quite literally create map-specific features outside of the primary gameplay structure so that things maintain both a universality and variety simultaneously. Black Ops 4 did a great job with this, as it had a loadout system, perk selector, and specialist weapons inside of the menu, but inside of each map, the main quests had enough difficulty, variation, and depth to keep players coming back, as well as would have unique gameplay features that pertain to only that singular map. Dead of the Night, for example, had not only its own main quests, side quests, and wonder weapons, but also had 2 hidden special weapons that had their own mini quests attached to retrieve the steak knife and savage impaler. And while the Tomb doesn't have a secondary secret weapon quest for players to enjoy, it does use difficulty spikes to challenge the player in different ways, which give this map a unique feeling compared to any of the previous experiences inside of Black Ops 6. Here's a minor example. Since the Ice Staff upgrade is so tough to build without perks and upgraded weapons, it's actually advantageous to go through and complete the side quests to help relieve that pressure. Things like shooting the rock debris in the sky to get a free tier 1 papped crystal and cryo freeze ammo mod, which you can then shoot the waterfalls to get a free rarity upgrade on your gun as well. There are multiple of these small little quests, from getting specific ammo mods to a free ray gun, and they are so powerful and can really help ease the burden for the player by rewarding them for their knowledge of the map, as it's these minute details that really help a map to stand out. But an even better demonstration of this is the golden armor vest that replenishes armor plates automatically. These are the types of rewards that help distinguish maps and give players a reason to come back to it many years down the line. That being said, the actual quest for the golden armor is just okay. The art design and eeriness of the battle arena is amazing, as a blood mist hovers around the player and obscures your vision, but the steps to begin the process itself are incredibly dull, as all the player needs to do is collect 2 statue heads hidden in boxes and place them on 2 statues inside of the spawn area. Real invigorating stuff. The reason that secret Easter eggs like the golden spork knife or the savage impaler work so well is due to the fact that zombies fans are solving cool puzzles that are intricate and unique, and then on top of that are rewarded for their troubles. So while this is a major step in the right direction, Treyarch still has some work to do with the overarching quest implementation to make the process of getting that reward feel extra meaningful. And while it's true that having great side Easter eggs are super important, if the gameplay loop of simply killing zombies isn't enjoyable, well then we also have a big problem. But this is where the Tomb absolutely shines, as running around the map and killing zombies is genuinely a fantastic experience. Now, to a lot of players' dismay, the map is on the small to medium size, which is understandably problematic within the context of the Tomb's promotional material. But on the other hand, it's quite nice to enjoy a densely packed map that does gameplay very well, which helps to scratch the zombies' itch until the next large piece of content comes about. Players are able to use a multitude of areas in the map, from the spawn room to the deep excavation area to the Shrine of the Hierophants, or deep inside of the Dark Ether Nexus. This is in part to the level design, as the shape of the map itself is one giant loop, and on top of that, the individual spaces are rather large, giving players a lot of room to train and horde zombies so that they can be ultimately taken down. There are also the etheric lanterns and the hidden arrow traps that make the utilization of training the entire map feel rewarding, as you can funnel the undead through these spaces and kill many of them before entering the next space. However, things can get a bit unmanageable in the later rounds, as there are so many boss zombies that it makes utilizing bullet weapons a bit preposterous, as the slew of zombies types, doppelgasts, shock mimics, and amalgams become quite contemptuous, and honestly, I don't understand the reasoning for having this many enemy types. The new zombies movement and spawn system already makes them spread very wide and populate in high numbers. The doppelgasts shoot out or explode an effect that slows the player down. The shock mimic can grab you at any moment from any angle, as well as prevents players from being able to move. And then there is the amalgam, who can also grab you from afar, but for whatever reason just drops you in the middle of a horde when it's completed the attack animation. Listen, it's completely understandable to have a wide array of enemies in a map, but it's usually under the guise of them having a diverse set of abilities. Not the same abilities, but slightly repackaged. And while this is rather irritating when using regular weaponry, fortunately, the Staff of Ice is ridiculously and diabolically overpowered, which helps to subdue the majority of these perceived gameplay issues. I just want everyone to know that I understand how strange it is that the Ice Staff is on this map, and I get that it makes about as much narrative sense as a Fortnite crossover event, but the weapon is just super fun to use. Now, the unupgraded form of the staff is really missing the punch that is needed to justify using it for any long period of time, but once fully upgraded, this thing is a monster, as Treyarch tweaked a few things making it even more palatable than its counterpart from Black Ops 2 and 3. When shooting the charge shot, there is a very clear indicator as to how long the shot lasts, where a large freeze spot will spawn in and begin to melt as the gust's power recedes. Treyarch also changed the charge shot indicator from monitoring 3 lights on the original iStaff and now has an audio cue that sounds like a high-pitched whine that takes about 3 or so seconds to charge, letting the player know that they are ready to fire. I do think that this is a positive change specifically for this game, as the zombies are so fast, and in tandem with the number of boss zombies on screen, it would just be another visual to monitor, so being able to rely on an audio cue feels quite right. The weapon also works with the Parting Gift Major Augment on Vulturade, which more or less gives the Wonder Weapon unlimited ammo, and it is a bit OP, but it can be fun at times, which at this point is all we got. That being said, when combining all these small aspects to the fact that the weapon does infinite damage and slows enemies down substantially, it shows that the iStaff can help turn any place inside of the tomb into a camping or training ground, which is fantastic for all types of playstyles. But where this works especially well is during high rounds. Now, for the most part, I have not been a high round enjoyer inside of Black Ops 6 Zombies. The experience is very pedantic, as it has players just camping, abusing exploits, and spamming mutant injections. But because the iStaff is so versatile, it actually gives players a real chance to experience high rounds in a normal manner. If you look at the footage on screen, you can see that I was able to achieve a round 100 on the platform by Juggernog, since that slowed zombies down by having them climb up onto my level, and I was able to dodge around the elite zombies and slowly tick away at their health. And of course, if anything bad happens, all you'd have to do is throw a monkey bomb or use your ether shroud and repeat the process. But there are other little strategies you can do aside from this, like train or camp inside of the Shrine of the Hierophants, while also leading the undead up through the arrow trap. The variety inside of the gameplay approach here on the tomb is really excellent, and it's great for camo grinding, casual experiences, and even for those who want that high round experience without the meticulous nature of spamming random exploits. And while I wish there was more focus on the actual narrative and reasoning behind the decisions that were made mechanically, you can't deny that the blend of increased difficulty, use of side quests, and the Wonder Weapon makes for some very delightful moments. As we've alluded to throughout this video, the tomb most certainly has redeemable qualities, primarily inside of the realm of gameplay and aesthetic design. But when it comes to the map's foundation, well, that's where it's a bit more problematic. And what's really frustrating about all this is that every time there seems to be a problem with the map, it generally falls on poor communication or badly framed expectations that leads us into that zombies experience. Because let's face it, a majority of players wouldn't have been upset if we saw the iStaff again. Most people would have been happy to have smaller survival maps in between larger DLC drops. Nor would fans have cared if we didn't receive great in-game cinematics, as long as the map was explained to be lighter on storyline information. The tomb was meant to take place after the events of DLC 1, explaining more about the relationship between Richtofen being Kraft's son, along with the influence of Chaos and the Sentinel artifact. These are immense plot points for the Dark Ether storyline, and there is no rationale behind any of the exposition. And again, it's not even a problem that a map doesn't have cutscenes or even a comic book menu screen. The problem lies within the certain set of parameters that Activision and Treyarch established within their hazy lines of communication inside of their marketing material. A map that is potentially in the same scope as Liberty Falls, but has just introduced one of the most important aspects from the Chaos storyline, plus the dig site implications, the additions of the iStaff and other Origins tie-ins, for then only surface level references to be loosely entangled, it's all very disconcerting and makes me wonder, why even go to these great lengths to try and appease the community, but then not follow through at all? Regardless of the fact that the individual story of the map is mediocre and all of the neutered corporate language in the blog posts, the overarching Dark Ether storyline is beginning to crumble under its own weight, as not only is it becoming cluttered, but is intentionally foregoing resolve for reasons I can't even begin to understand. And so while Treyarch is definitely taking steps in the right direction with its main quests, side Easter eggs, difficulty, and boss fights, the tomb fell completely short inside of the conveyance of marketing and narrative, making it appear that the developers don't really have much of a vision when it comes to the direction of Black Ops 6 Zombies. This in turn has destroyed a lot of the goodwill that Treyarch had rebuilt inside of the Zombies community, leaving many players to feel taken advantage of with nostalgia, confused about the focus of the mode, and contemptuous with the never-ending cycle of sleight-of-hand marketing machination.